Right, we're back live with you now. Let's turn to this. A recent independent report recommends that Unisa be placed under administration. As things stand, the Gauteng-based institution has put its registrar, Professor Steward Mothata, on precautionary suspension following misconduct allegations. At the same time, the University of Fort Hare in the Eastern Cape has also been in the news for all the wrong reasons. 2 university officials have been killed and some are alleged to be receiving death threats in a procurement tussle. For more on the state of our institutions of higher learning in South Africa, we are now joined by the distinguished professor in education at the Stellenbosch University, Professor Jansen, also the author of the book Corrupted, a study of the chronic dysfunction of our universities. Prof, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight here on In Focus.
Thank you, sir.
In your book, you highlight what you say is images of dysfunction that are evident everywhere, from student protests to the burning of institutions to the presence of police on campus. You name it, disruption of the academic year and so on and so forth, and some dodgy appointments as well at our institutions of academic learning. When you look at the picture that you gathered during your work as you were putting together that book, and where things are today with the kind of reports that I'm telling you now, which I'm sure you also know, is the image getting worse, the image of dysfunction, or has there been an effort to intervene?
Yes, thank you. Look, the reason I wrote the book is because of what the subtitle calls chronic dysfunction. In other words, dysfunction that has been there, for almost all the 30 years of our young democracy, that a university would time after time after time after time fall into dysfunction. The minister intervenes, gets an assessor to appraise the situation, appoints an administrator to run the university for a period of time, and then the university goes backsliding back into dysfunction. And I was curious as to why we were not able to solve these problems, and that's what the book addresses. But you're right, these issues have not only come on over a long period of time, they affect so many of our institutions across the board, not just the rural disadvantaged universities like Fort Hare, but even the more elite, well-resourced universities like UCT.
Professor Pityane also weighed in on, for example, the state of deterioration as far as governance is concerned. But I find something interesting that was raised by the South African Union of Students that says the institutions of higher learning in South Africa are operating as ivory towers outside the legislative framework that governs, for example, other public institutions. So you would find universities in poor rural areas, for example, having a budget that is probably even more than that which exists in that local municipality. The question of universities amassing so much resource, is that by design?
Universities, I honestly don't understand what the student body is saying. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. A university is an expensive place to run. In many of our poorer communities, it is the only and the single most important employer. Right? Take Alice, for example. If you took the university out of Alice, or you took Rhodes University out of Makanda, what do you have? Nothing. So the university is a major employer, not just, by the way, of academics, but of people who clean the institution, of people who do the gardening, of people who, maintain the entire. So rather than see, to say a university is elite is nonsense. It's like saying a cat is cuddly. By its nature, a university selects the best talent in a region or in a country or in the world, both as teachers and professors, but also as students. And it makes those young, talented graduates to become leaders, not just in the public sector, but the private sector in the world, and so on. So, of course, they're elite. I mean, they're elite because they select, and so on. But also to say universities are ivory towers is nonsense. It's like taking European language and American language and putting it here. I don't know of a single one of our 26 public universities that doesn't spend a significant amount of its resources on building the community directly. For example, I'm at Stellenbosch University. A quarter of my time, by design, is spent rebuilding schools in the poorest communities in South Africa. Yeah. So that old medieval notion that the university is ivory tower on the hill is just absolute nonsense. Our universities in South Africa, in much of the continent, by the way, are heavily and deeply invested in community development. Let me give you a very practical, extreme example. Did you know that the University of Fort Hare runs the sewage system for Alice? This is supposed to be run by the municipality. Yeah. But because the municipality is corrupt and dysfunctional, the university steps in to do development work. And that is the nature of the South African university.
And so does, for example, an arrangement of that nature give the universities exemption from being subjected, for example, to the same legislative framework of municipalities in how they spend those budgets? So, you know, municipalities, of course, would either be governed by the Public Finance Management Act in how, for example, procurement would be conducted.
No. The PMFA, the Public Finance Management, as you know, is specifically for government-type entities. A university is a different kind of creature, you know. It's just like a school is a different kind of creature. That doesn't mean there aren't accounting standards. That doesn't mean there aren't internal and external audit authorities. That doesn't mean that a council of a university, which is the highest decision-making body of the university, doesn't require that money be spent according to very strict guidelines received from the Department of Higher Education and Training. That doesn't mean we are not obligated to submit to the DHET, that is to Minister Blade and Zimandia's department, annually, audited financial statements. So it doesn't mean that because you're not under the PFA that you're not subjected to very rigorous standards by which you account for spending and so on and so forth. That's been happening for years, and that's the way it should be. Now, not all universities, obviously, abide by those kinds of standards, and that is why they end up in trouble.
Now, would you then be opposed to this idea that the students are raising to say universities must be treated like all other institutions in terms of how, for example, procurement is being done? I'll tell you, the context of that conversation was, of course, based on what came out in the report at Unisa in how money was spent, overspending on the Vice-Chancellor's property, and how, for example, those who were supposed to be watching that, in some instances, pleaded ignorance and didn't know what was going on there. And saying if this institution would be run like all other public institutions, there would be tighter governance measures being put in place. I mean, not that they work in government itself, because we all know that they have not been successfully working there either. But would it assist universities if they were made to report like all other public institutions?
Look, when people say things like that, I get a little bit irritated. Please forgive me, But we have a long struggle in this country for universities being autonomous institutions. That is, they're not run like government departments. This is not the Department of Electricity. This is a university. And anywhere in the world, a university is an autonomous structure that runs its own business according to acceptable rules of finance, of auditing, of accounting, and so on and so forth. But separate out two issues here. Separate out what I think personally is something that must be stopped as a policy, and that is for a person to come to university and get a house, buy your own house, as a vice chancellor, for a person to come to university and get a university car, buy your own car. You get paid enough as a vice-chancellor or a deputy vice-chancellor to be able to afford those things. And where universities land up in trouble, like Unisa, for example, is when there's perks, there's over and above your salary, a whole lot of stuff that you get, which in my view, and I might side with the students, but as a matter of policy, not as a matter of legislation. Now, secondly, you must distinguish that from normal procurement processes that all universities are subjected to anyway, right? You can't just go and buy, furniture or buy lecture rooms, equipment, etc. There's very strict guidelines, for procuring those. You must get competitive bids from different, etc. Those things must go through tender committees, appointed by council and so on and so forth. So I don't think we should confuse issues here. On the one hand, there are all rules, regulations, policies, procedures by which universities abide in procurement, if I may take your example. That is a separate issue from ignoring those rules, from breaking those regulations, from being corrupt in the way in which you appoint, for example, successful bidders. That's a separate issue. But there are adequate, in my view, having been in universities most of my life, there are more than adequate regulations, policies, procedures for managing procurement, provided we abide by our own rules. Those universities that end up in trouble are often universities that have formal rules and then ignore them because of their corrupt behaviors.
How did we allow these corrupt behaviors to come in? Because Professor Pityane says it's university councils probably that we need to be looking at that have been invaded by characters who do not have the interest of the institutions at heart, but rather looking at wanting to advance their own personal gains.
Professor Pityane is absolutely correct. When you appoint leadership at a university level, like the Vice-Chancellor, you've got to make sure that that person is not only a person with the skill set to run a university, but a person of integrity, right? We don't hire people like that. We first look at whether they're black or white. We first look at whether they belong to party X or party Y. We first look whether they're likable or not. We don't look at competent people who have the character, to be able, the capacity and the integrity to run a university. Similarly, when it comes to council, now remember, these are part-time people. These are not people employed by the university. And yet, you'll see in some of our universities, a political scramble to get an ANC person or a DA, whatever the case might be, to dominate in those spaces. When you're hiring people because of their political connections and not of their capacity to govern, in the case of a council, or their capacity to manage in the case of the executive, then you get the kind of chaos that you see today at VUT, at Steward Mothata, at Unisa, and indeed at places like UCT. So let's not be mistaken. We have shot ourselves in both feet, by hiring people who don't have the range of skills, the temperament to lead, the qualifications to manage, the ability to work in teams. Yeah. People who are thick-skinned and don't every time as leaders, and people who don't look to the university to enrich themselves. Yeah. And when you hire the wrong people in leadership, you get the kind of mess that we're in at the moment at places like Unisa.
Are you saying this is because you mentioned that, of course, we did this in an effort to transform the institutions. We said we are doing this in the name of transformation. Is there something that we did wrong in setting parameters of how we transform these institutions that would then allow all these other elements that we do not need to also come in as we open the gates?
Yeah, no. I want to be very careful here. I'm not blaming transformation for this. I'm blaming just bad decision-making for this, right? So let me give you an example. I firmly believe we need more women vice-chancellors in this country. It's clear to me. It's an injustice that we have appointed men for most of 100 years of South African university life. It's very clear to me you need more black women vice-chancellors. But if you're going to appoint a black woman vice-chancellor, choose the right one. Choose people who are competent. Choose people. So we mustn't confuse the two. We can get both. We can both transform our institutions, so that you give everybody a chance, and particularly those who have been most neglected in the case of black people in general and black women in particular. We can get that goal, and at the same time, get people who have the capacity, the integrity, the temperament to lead. And I don't believe for one moment that those people aren't out there. Where things get messy is that we don't just look for those things. We look for somebody who can connect us to the inside to ensure that the resources of the university flows in a preferred direction. We look for people simply because they look like us without any regard for whether they have the capacity and integrity to lead. And that is something that's happened for years. The white people did it. The Afrikaners did this, in the previous century. We do it now as black people, and so on and so forth. So it's not mutually exclusive things. We must be able to transform and broaden the representation of people, but choose the right people with the skill set, with the temperament to manage our universities. Remember, a university is not a government department. It needs people with the intellect. It needs people who don't jump because the chief whip said you must jump.
Right.
It needs people who understand how a university is different from a church or a mosque, or how a university is different from a club, how a university is different from a political party. If you don't understand those basic values of a modern university, you will run it into the ground, and that's exactly where we are today.
So, Prof, are you saying it's easy, as you put it, to marry that institutional capacity, the brain that you need there, and the institutional integrity to find people of that caliber?
No, absolutely. And at the same time, transform. I don't want to use names. Take a guy like Vincent Mapai. Why is Vincent Mapai not running one of our universities? He ticks all the boxes in terms of leadership, temperament, capacity, etc., and he's a professor of political science. But we don't go for him. You go for people who have a CV as thin as this when it comes to managing the university. Listen, I managed the university. You better know a lot, and you better know it well enough, and you better know how to build teams, and you better know your limitations, and therefore what the other people in your team need to look like, and you better learn how to swallow a lot of crap, because it's a tough job in terms of criticism. But if every time you jump out of your skin because somebody said negative things about you, you can't lead. You're still leading your home, let alone lead a university with 30,000, 40,000 students. So those people are there. And I can give you a long list of names of people who are out there, who are capable of leading our universities, but they get looked over because they're too independent. You see, they don't toe the party line. They don't jump up when a minister enters a room and do praise singing. Those kinds of people are the people you need in a university. Not the kind of venal, thin-skinned, politically opportunist people who don't know a thing about running a university, but they're there in their suits and ties and fancy clothes and fancy, cars and houses given by the university, and we then pretend not to understand why we're in a crisis when we ourselves are the architects of the mess that you see today in our 26 public university.
We are in conversation with Professor Jonathan Jansen, Stellenbosch University Professor of Education, and of course he's the author of the book Corrupted, a study of chronic dysfunction in South Africa's universities. Prof, Fort Hare University fleet manager, Petrus Roots, you know the story, was gunned down shortly after he himself requested permission to carry a weapon on campus because he feared for his life. Now, others are saying what was at play there was also private interests. In other words, business syndicates. Maybe they could be politically linked as well, but these are business interests of private players who want to dip into these resources of the university and operational money that is in the university. So how do you insulate Senate? How do you insulate Council? How do you insulate student leaders from these elements?
Well, you have to take a fairly tough line up and down the food chain. You must understand that what happens at Fort Hare, and I've studied it very closely, and you'll know it appears in the book Corrupted quite a bit. What happened at Fort Hare is at every level of the institution, from the council to the Senate, from the Senate to the registrar's office, from the registrar's office to fleet management, everybody was in it for themselves. And the people on the inside connected themselves to people on the outside, what you call private interests, not just the private sector, but private individuals, in order to siphon off the money into these vultures. And what happened was that when Professor Sakele Buhlungu, the Vice Chancellor, came on board and started to turn off the taps, then he became a target with a mark on his back and a lot of money on his head, as you know. And they killed Mr. Roots because he turned off the taps and said, you are no longer going to use the vehicles of the university. as a way of enriching yourselves. And one of his colleagues said to him straight, it will take me one call and it'll be the end of you. And it was the end of it. Mr. Vesele, all he's doing as a bodyguard is protecting, the senior executive team. And he had hardly dropped off the vice chancellor, as you know, when he himself got killed. Why are we killing our own people? Okay, simply to get your hands on the university's resources. And I tell you something, if it wasn't for Professor Buhlungu and his team there, that university would have been shut down a long time ago. And you know who will lose? The young people who come from the most rural areas of the Eastern Cape in particular, and other provinces, would lose the opportunity to study at university that's barely functional, as it is. And so it is very distressing, and South Africans must really rally around universities like Fort Hare. It's one of our oldest universities, one of our most prestigious universities by reputation. And to see this constant assault, by the way, as you know, it's not just the average crook in Alice or in King, or East London. It's also people very high up in political office.
Yeah.
That see the university as a place to rip off the resources, and we must protect our institutions. We only have 26 public universities, and I tell you now, they are under threat because of this run on the resources of our institutions.
Well, what's your view on the political oversight that is entrusted with this particular sector? Is there adequate oversight on this sector?
You know what? It's I'll probably end up in a lot of trouble if I told you what I really think.
I think you just might, but go ahead nonetheless.
No, look, let me speak in generalities, and I think South Africans will know what I mean. I don't think that the political classes in our country, at the provincial level, at the local level, at the national level, are always the people of the greatest integrity when it comes to higher education. And I wish I could elaborate, but I won't. So read the assessors' reports, and there's been more than one on Fort Hare, on Mangosuthu University of Technology, on any one of these troubled institutions, VUT, Vaal University. Just read the assessor report on Unisa, and you'll see there are criminal syndicates who are politically connected. This is not just the tsotsi in the township, out to make a kill. These are the people who wear suits and ties, who drive around in blue light brigades, and sit in, parliamentary committees and so on and so forth. And you'll see some of these references in my book, who are themselves not very innocent, both in terms of not exercising oversight as they should, but in some cases being themselves, involved in some of these shenanigans. So I don't think we have adequate political cover, and you would have seen that at Fort Hare, where the Vice Chancellor just said, I'm going straight to the president. I advised him against that, but I understood subsequently why there was so much fear, so much concern that we weren't getting adequate political cover at the provincial level, at the national level, and so on and so forth. And when you don't get that kind of cover in a place like Fort Hare, in a place like the University of Zululand, it's very easy for Nkabi to get 50,000, 100,000 rands. They don't even know who you are, and take you out at the robots. So these are very serious issues, because on the one hand, we're trying to keep this asset, this treasure, this place that produces thousands of graduates every year for, to serve the country. On the one hand, you're trying to do that as a university vice chancellor, and then on the other hand, you're just trying to stay alive.
How are we going to get this right, Prof? I mean, the question that you're raising of the depoliticization of our universities, especially our university councils. For example, the Public Service Commission is involved now in the similar process to try and depoliticize our municipalities and officials in particular. And the unions are up in arms to say, well, what do you mean a person who occupies a particular position can also be a leader of a political party in his community. How are we going to get that right in our institutions of higher learning when it seems it's something that, I suppose, goes all the way down to even other sectors?
Yeah, you know what was for me a very, a very revealing, but also very, earth-shattering kind of discovery when I did the research for that book, is that there's absolutely no reason to think that the university as a public, institution, there's absolutely no reason, whatever I might think in my idealistic views of university, that it should be different from an ESCOM, that it should be different from a Transnet, that it should be different from any other public entity, sadly, because it's the same kind of people, the same kind of corrupt people, the same kinds of hungry people, if you know what I mean, who want to lay their hands on that resource. Whether you take it, ask yourself this: what kind of country allows, as in KZN, for the children of the poorest of the poor not to get their meals, the school nutrition, not to get their meals on time, knowing full well that that's the only meal that child gets, knowing full well that child will go through hunger. What have we become? So you mustn't underestimate this and think that you can shield the university from the general corruption in the public sector. It doesn't work like that, I wish it was a place where we didn't get dragged into the mud the way the hospitals are, the way these other failed entities are, and so on. But sadly, same kind of people that cruise through parliament, that cruise through, provincial municipalities, are the same people who cruise through into universities, especially onto councils, and they bring the same and because universities are relatively more stable, than, for example, the municipalities, they become the next target, for hungry, uncouth, and corrupt people. And so the universities have become a target for a reason, and that is that a lot of the other public entities have run out of money. And now, especially in the rural areas, you see the university as the last place in which you can still put your hand, for example, on millions in infrastructural funds that are meant to build residences for students, housing spaces, etc., etc. So we're under attack as universities. I've called together for a team of 12 thinkers. We're going to meet in early August. Some very prominent people. We're going to close the door and we're going to sort of say, how do we think our way out of this trouble? Because if your universities go down the way, every other entity goes down, then you can switch the lights off. You don't have to wait for ESCOM to switch the lights off. Then you have no country, because education is still the only way you can get a country like ours out of trouble.
And I'm sure amongst those who will be meeting, Prof, you'll also discuss this issue that I see your colleagues are also raising sharply, the quality of professorate. They're talking in particular as far as the report is concerned at Unisa, and how that is compromising the quality of studies, but most importantly, the quality of research, as you put it.
Now, Unisa, I tell you, I'm an alumnus of Unisa. I did 2 of my degrees at Unisa. I care deeply about Unisa. And that's why I'm so critical of it, And they started the rot by hiring people as professors who wouldn't even be hired at any university in the world as a lecturer, because they don't understand what a university is, And so you get these youngsters. I mean, you even see some of these politicians, Professor so-and-so, I don't want to mention their names here, and they say, what the hell? They've never done a deep thinking in their lives. They've never written books that changed the world. They've never worked, they haven't done research that were impactful. And here they are, because you think a university is like, your bloody drinking club down the road that you can just show up, get drunk, and then, become well-known among your peers. No. And so we have to protect, especially this handing out of degrees and this handing out of it, to the extent that we see at places, I won't mention names, it's in the book, that they sell these things to people, in order to make money. No, we're in trouble, and the only thing that gives me hope for the university sector is there's enough people like Professor Pachana, there's enough people, of that caliber who understand that Africa needs strong universities. It is the engine room for producing the skills, the higher level skills, etc., that you need to keep a modern economy afloat.
Prof, you've been so generous with your time this evening. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on and for engaging us in this conversation.